Pozdrav, dobrodošli u Netokracija, podcast koji se ovaj put snima na Infobip Shift konferenciji, najvećoj developerskoj konferenciji koja se održava u Hrvatskoj i koja nam je ove godine donijela niz odličnih predavača, gosti, sudionika koji raspravljaju o najrazličitijim aktualnim temama u svijetu developera, tehnologije, razvoja blockchaina, cloud native-a, developer experience-a, web developmenta i svega ostalog. Zato smo ovaj podcast posvetili intervjuima sa nekoliko njih. Now we're joined here by Charity Majors, CTO and co-founder of Honeycomb, but also someone who is pretty vocal expressing some rather unpopular opinions in developer community. And you are speaking here at Infobip Shift about one of those unpopular opinions, which is that we have not fulfilled and it's time to fulfill the promise of continuous delivery.
Exactly.
Please tell us more.
So I feel like the CI/CD revolution, it's like 15 years old now. And, they say, CI/CD, it's about continuous integration and continuous delivery, by which they mean you should be ready to deploy at any time, not you should deploy your code, which 15 years ago, I understand why that was the best that they could do, right? Nowadays, we have no excuse. It should be continuous deployment. You should get your code into production within, I would say, 15 minutes of writing it. That's the best. Like, the goal here is to make production as much like a REPL as possible. Where, in a REPL, it's like a shell you open and you're typing code and you're watching how it's being interpreted and how it's working as you develop it, which allows you to catch mistakes and fix them like immediately. We know that the cost of finding and fixing bugs goes up exponentially from the moment that you write it. So the sooner you can find it, the better. And most of us have this delay between, you're writing the code and then you commit it, and then at some future point, somebody's going to deploy it, probably along with all the changes of some number of other engineers all at once. That completely decouples. It makes the idea of code ownership, like, it just severs that link, right? Versus if you know that your code is going out within the next few minutes, your code and your code alone, you're probably going to go look at it in production and see, is it doing what I expect it to do? Does anything else look weird? But if you don't know when your code is going out, someone else is going to deploy it. It might be out within hours or days or weeks or whatever. You're never going to go look at it. And even if you did, how would you know if it was your changes that broke it versus one of the other developers whose changes? So I feel like this is such an important, it is transformational for teams who achieve this.
And it's exactly what you're saying, like this developers have to lose fear of deployment to become great engineers, to become better engineers.
Become even senior engineers, I would say.
Okay, so what do you think makes a great engineer?
Being able to own your code in production. Being responsible for the stuff that you put out into the world. Tightening that feedback loop so that you're not just like writing your code and some ops team will take care of it or the SREs will take care of it. No, you own your code. You own it in production. You're responsible for you have a responsibility to your users to make sure that it's working. Your job is not done until you've done that.
And that also makes developers happier developers.
Absolutely. Engineers who have experienced this are not willing to go back to the bad old ways, because it's the difference between having a job where you spend most of your time solving interesting new problems, and making users happy. That's the dream, right? Engineering should be a creative profession where you spend most of your time doing interesting new things. If this feedback loop breaks down, I think there's like the death spiral in development. Like, it starts taking longer and longer before your code is live, which means that you have bigger diffs, which means it takes longer to review them, which means that it gets even longer, which means that you probably aren't even the one who's debugging your bugs, which means that somebody else has to swap in all the information and context that you used to have, which takes them away from what they were doing. Everything gets slower and more boring and more tedious, and you spend less and less time doing the stuff that you love, that it's all about.
do developers usually understand that? Like, do they agree with you? Because we did an interview announcing your talk on Netocracia, and you said, like, you should be ready to deploy whenever.
You should deploy.
You should deploy whenever. And I can tell you there were many yes buts in the comment section.
Of course. There are many yes buts. And I know it's a little bit hyperbolic and a little bit inflammatory, and it is a goal, right? But the point of the goal is that the closer you get to it, the better your life will be. You don't have to get it all the way there in order to get amazing benefits. If you just make it so that each merge set is being deployed on its own, so that developers can go and see their own changes, that's a huge improvement in everyone's life. If you just shrink the time between when you're writing it and when you're deploying it, that's a huge improvement for, like, there's so much low-hanging fruit here that people are just, and like, it's just like compounding debt, right? Like when you've got a $60,000 debt and you just never pay it off, you're just paying it constantly. The debt around development and deploys and debugging is the single largest source of debt in almost every organization that I've ever seen. And it's not hard. It's just engineering. We just need to commit some cycles to improving it on a regular basis.
You usually say it's not technically hard, but it's socio-technically. So what's the problem behind it?
Because it's very easy for technical leaders and even engineers to be like, okay, features lead to profit, right? Users want more features. So like, it's easy to get time to say, okay, we're going to spend the next 2 weeks working on a feature, and then the next feature, and then the next feature. If you want to take time to make the development process and the deployment process, it looks from the outside like wasted time, or time that you're not spending on making your users happy. But that's like being on Titanic and going, well, we're just not going to repair the ship. You know, yeah, you can get away with that for a while, but the longer it goes, the more things break down, and the more I've seen companies. Have you ever seen a company that has like 800 engineers, and you're like, and all they do is one little app, and you're like, what are they all doing?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Because you waste so much time and energy. Like, you get into this cycle where everything takes so long. It's a concurrency problem, right? Everything takes so hard, and you spend a lot of time waiting on each other, and so you try to fix it by hiring more people.
Throw some money on
it. And it doesn't work. It just makes everything even slower. You've got even more resources contending for this lot.
That's exactly what happens. Like they double the engineering team and they deliver less and slower.
It is so much easier as a manager to ask for more money to hire people than it is to make the case for the time that you need to improve your internal systems to make everyone more productive.
Do you think this kind of hot topic and buzzword of developer experience and focusing on developer experience and these tools that are built to make things easier for developers will help?
I hope it would be nice. Right now, though, it feels to me like it's mostly about the experience of writing code, right? And the experience of to the individual developer, and not what goes on between after you've written the code and when the code is live, right? That isn't something you can like touch and feel in the same way as most of these tools do, but it's everything when it comes to efficiency. Have you seen the Stripe developer report where they're like, there's like $3 trillion in untapped social development for developer productivity, just because almost like engineers self-report that they spend almost 40% of their time just wasting time, just like waiting for stuff to finish, just like trying to figure out what they're supposed to work on, trying to orient. It's like half of our time is doing. You would think this would be a big deal, right? No, I have a lot more hope for. I think that the current generation of, for a long time, people thought, engineering managers maybe didn't need to be all that technical. Or they thought, it's like two sides. Either like, well, you don't have to be that technical, or, well, we'll just take the best engineer and make them managers, right? Neither of those are the good strategy. You want someone who understands how the sausage is made, But you also want someone who thinks about it from, like you said, from a socio-technical perspective, because you have to translate the needs of the team into something that, finance and the CEO and all can understand, which is dollars and cents, right? Just looking at if it takes us 2 days to deploy some code, converting that into, we're wasting, 5 engineers worth of salary every quarter just by the slowness of all this stuff, right? You have to learn to speak other teams' language in order to make the case for, no, we're going to build the stuff that you never see, you don't know it exists, and it doesn't sound important to you, but it is, and then building on that trust.
And now that you'd mentioned engineering managers and what makes good engineering managers, also one of the topics you have pretty strong opinions about.
True.
What makes good engineering managers?
Well, first of all, you want someone who's a senior engineer, at least 7 to 8, ideally 10 years into their career. And then you want someone who, they don't have to be the best engineer. They need to understand it.
It's probably better if they're not the best engineer.
I wouldn't go that far, but there's no correlation as far as I could tell. But you want someone who cares about the people and someone who is a systems thinker, someone who doesn't just look at the code or just look at production or just look at the people, but who looks at the messy, confused interactions of all 3 and looks for ways to improve all of them, right? The deploy process is such a powerful touch point because it touches on all 3. And when you improve it, it makes everyone's jobs easier. It makes everything faster, right? You want someone who cares about those things. You want someone who is ready for a different challenge, someone who understands, though, that it's not a promotion. I feel very strongly management is not a promotion. It's a change of career.
Exactly. And when it comes to career development, what would you say for a senior developer looking into developing his career in the next 10, 15 years?
Yeah.
Do they have to become engineering manager?
They have to.
Or tech lead? Or can you stay an individual contributor and still feel you're progressing in your career?
It means something different at every company I've ever seen. So on that, I don't know. I will say that I think the best senior technologists that I've ever worked with have been engineers who are never more than 3, maybe 5 years away from writing code themselves, but they've also done stints as managers. There are skills that you can develop as a manager that make you a better engineer, make you a more effective leader. There are also ways to develop those skills without formally being an engineering manager, right?
Yeah, but you have to intentionally seek to develop them.
Yeah.
And that's not what developers often do.
No, it's not. So I think we asked everyone if they're interested in management. I think a really important part of this is sort of demystifying it and making it less seem like, oh, someday I might be tapped by the management fee. Dear God, will they give it to you? Right? It's not that serious. It's not that fancy. It's just a skill set. And if you're interested in building that skill set, there's a lot of ways you can start to build those skills without them. You can kind of taste and see if you really enjoy it. You can start taking over hiring and recruiting. Learn to onboard new engineers. Look at mentorship. Take on an intern or 2. If you enjoy that, you can start to pay attention to the suggest ways to improve inner workings of the team, the process. You can do things like when the manager goes on parental leave for a couple of months, take over for them. Learn to run a meeting. Every senior contributor should know how to run a good meeting, right? These are skills that you can absolutely build on.
And also something we have to work on, this notion that you can try, get a taste of what management looks like, get back without feeling as you failed.
Yes. This is why I think it's so important to remember that management is not a promotion, because if that's true, then going back to engineering is not a demotion. And you don't have to feel bad about yourself. You don't have to feel anything other than, yeah, I tried it. It was hard. It was fun. I learned a lot. But it's not for me. At least not right now.
So what would you say, like, just to wrap this up, from your personal experience as someone who has been an engineer, a team lead, a manager, and now CTO, like what were your learnings?
30 seconds or less, right? I don't know. It's I think the main thing that I learned, which is I'm writing an article literally right now about this, which is just that the best. I feel like when we're engineers, when we're all starting out, we have this sort of. It's just like the people above us, they're mysterious. You're just like, they must be so much more greater than me, or their job must be so different or so hard, whatever. Or they must have so much freedom and latitude. Like I feel so many constraints, and they're up there, they get to call the shots. It's just not true. Every level has its own constraints, your own set of like constituents. You know, you have to balance the needs of all these different people and teams and you owe things to. You're never liberated to do whatever you want to. And I don't know. I feel like some of the best engineers have been managers, and they get back and they realize that. So they have a lot of empathy for their managers, and they just become these amazing contributors because they've done management. They're back to engineering, and they have this way. You asked me my learnings, right? I just feel like everybody should try out a lot of stuff.
Great. That's a great closing line. Thank you so much. Great having you here at Infobip Shift in Zadar. We're here with Grace Francisco, Vice President of Developer Relations at Cisco. And Grace, you have shared with us your personal reinvention story, your unconventional career path. So can you please tell us a bit more on that?
Sure. I mean, I guess the summary of my talk is sort of reflecting on the very non-traditional path I took in my career. We're often taught that career paths are supposed to be very linear. You start in a company and you're in a junior role and you move up the ladder. And for some people, that's perfectly fine. But for some of us, like myself, especially not knowing what I really wanted to do in my career, it took some exploring and some sort of zigzaggy motions in my career to really get to a place where I felt I could really add a ton of value and continue to learn and also give back to others. And so, you know, that didn't create the linear path, even though my opener introduction of myself looks that way. It looks very beautiful because my team makes this linear path of all the great companies I worked for. The experience of it was very zigzaggy. And for some people, they're afraid of that. There's fear in following non-traditional routes, but actually, you know, life is short. I love that I've had an adventure in my career. I think that that's one of the best things of sort of this accidental path that I've taken in my career.
So you actually started working in tech support, then you self-taught yourself to code, and then you really switched many roles, niches, industries. You worked as a sales engineer, then you were engineering manager, an engineer at startups, at big companies, medium companies, and then you've discovered this space of developer relations.
I did, and I thought it was very rare. At the time, only big companies like Microsoft and Apple had this role of what was then called developer evangelists. And I loved having this very rare opportunity, especially as a woman doing public speaking in this very unique role. But it was also kind of amusing sometimes because I would, you know, go travel and people would ask me, what do you do? And I would have to, you know, tell them developer evangelist, and, you know, they would have this look and I would say, no, it's okay. Not the Bible kind. This is a different kind of evangelist. These days, most of us call them developer advocates. So my team, we call them developer advocates. And it was very amusing when this shift happened from developer evangelists to developer advocates, because I was at Atlassian at the time. Atlassian is an Australian-based company. And I remember a colleague saying to me, oh no. And I said, why oh no? Developer advocate's pretty neutral. And he said, no. In Australia, advocate means lawyer. My mother never wants me to be a lawyer.
Yeah, same in Croatia.
You can't win. Like, oh, okay, I don't know. And so that's where we've landed so far in terms of the title of the the people that go out and do a lot of public speaking, technical talks, and getting developers to use the tools and technologies.
So what was in developer advocacy, relations, or evangelism, whatever you call it, that attracted you?
Well, one was I was able to apply my sales engineering skills right away into the role. You need to be able to communicate, you need to be able to present, you need to be able to pull together very technical content and sample code, and to be able to talk the talk and walk the walk and speak to other developers in very technical terms. And so I had that to bring with me into a role like that. It just was much more of an expansion in terms of the kinds of speaking opportunities. It wasn't just one-to-one to customers. It was one-to-many customers and conferences like this where you get to go and speak much more broadly. And that opened up all sorts of opportunities for me to travel, meet people, build partnerships with other organizations. And so my scope and influence had grown tremendously in being just from sales engineer, where I had a lot of influence in my district, but then to be an evangelist with global scope was a whole new ballpark of opportunities and challenges, but the challenges were very useful in terms of that continuous learning cycle that I talked about in my talk just now.
Yeah, sounds like a really rewarding job for you,
Yeah.
But then again, developers are notorious for being really hard to get audience, right? Do you have any secrets on how to win developers?
Do I have any secrets? One is always being authentic. I think, someone in an earlier talk said, "Oh, never market to developers.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't like market." No. And what I would say about that, there is some level of authentic marketing, but that marketing has to be very technically grounded and needs to be thought with the fact of helping to educate and get a developer to that aha moment of understanding what a technology or tool does for them that helps them in their day-to-day job. If you can't use any sort of fluffy messaging with developers because they smell it right away and they run away the other direction. So you're bringing really great educational content is the key, is thinking about how you're talking to them in a way that will help them in their day-to-day work.
You have been working in tech for a really long time.
I have. I don't want to count the years.
You don't have to. But I want to ask you, as a woman in tech, what has changed and what hasn't since you've started? I mean, you mentioned in your talk that when you had kids, people would ask you when you're going to quit your job.
Yes. I think, and that is a difficult question to answer right now, because what I've seen personally, and it's always good to have numbers and data. And the reality is, one thing that has changed in the last 10 years is that we are using data to inform us about the issues with diversity in tech. So that's a starting point. But the benchmark numbers aren't great. Like where we sit in terms of women in tech is still low. In fact, in some comparisons, it's lower than what the numbers were for women in tech in the 80s. Now that's sad, because back then it was, mid-20s, 20%. Now it's like in the upper teens. So we're still working our way back up to what we were in the 80s. And that's an unfortunate situation. But we're using data, we're trying to run programs. It's now top of mind for most companies. Before it was, you were lucky if your company even thought about diversity, that thought about how to help women, thought about the fact that most women in tech and science fields in general, there's a huge drop-off mid-career. Almost 50% of women drop off mid-career. And I think it goes back to this experience that I had when I was starting to have children, which is that lack of cultural and work support around being a working woman and having a child for the first time. It's daunting, it's scary. And if you don't have a support network around you to help you understand how to balance things out, what time to use to recover, what time to use to enjoy this very precious time with your baby, many women will just opt to just quit, because that's also back to what people do because it's the comfortable route that everyone else does. That's the norm for a lot of people, and we need to also make it a norm to make it a choice if they do want to actually go back to work. There have been famous tech executives who went back to work right away after having a baby, and they were villainized, and we shouldn't do that. It's a personal choice whether you go back to work right away, or you go back to work after student leave, or you go back to work after several years. Those are all personal choices that we should all be supportive of, and not villainize someone for making one choice over another.
Let's finish on this thought I love, like choosing unconventional career paths.
Yeah.
Whatever you choose, it's good if it makes you happy. Would that be your kind of overarching career advice for both women in tech and tech people in general?
Yes, with the caveat that, and it was interesting to see one of the first speakers today talk about how people want to quit a job and work for themselves because they think that's easier. But actually, the reality, he painted a good picture of like what the reality is of working for yourself and having a startup. In every job, whether you're the founder of the company or you're working for someone else, there's a tax that you pay. There's work that you're not going to necessarily like to do, but it's part of the job. And then there are the bits and pieces that attract you to do the work to begin with. And hopefully those are the things that every day, despite the challenges of the taxes that you have to pay. I'll give you an example. Expense reports aren't fun. Reporting isn't fun for most people, but it's part of the job. But then everything else that goes into that is the fun, hopefully the fun part that attracted you to that role. Those are the things that hopefully get you jumping out of bed and excited about the day every day. That's what I would advocate for people to strive to find. It's not something that everyone is able to find, but if you're especially in places like this and in the U.S. and Western Europe, we have more opportunities to think about that, to think a little bit differently about the opportunities in front of us.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's a really nice message. And also, I love how you example of that, like you worked as a sales engineer, which would probably some engineers would look down on, and then you discovered developer relations, and that's where you find your true place. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So, hi, we're here with Sven from Manfred, who just had a presentation about how to be an effective developer and how to work smarter, not harder. So, Sven, please tell us how to become a developer who works smarter, not harder.
That was the talk, and the talk was 30 minutes. I could repeat the talk now, but just essentially build the stuff that your users really need and that moves them forward. Concentrate on solving problems for your users. A lot of developers are sometimes in love with the technology, which is great. I love that. I also love technology, but at the end, it's all about solving problems for our users.
Yeah, we hear that often. Like developers are keen to falling for the new shiny tech and a new front-end framework, as you said it, or optimizing for the performance metrics, which ultimately customers don't care about your performance metrics. How do you get rid of that? Is it just experience? You become more senior, or you burn out?
So how do you get rid of that? Good question. I think it's just like being interested. Of course, you need to learn new technologies because our industry is moving so fast that you just want to keep up with what's going on. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to use all this new shiny things. They look shiny, and they probably you can, with some technologies, remove a bunch of lines of code. With others, they are maybe easier to work with. But at the end, it's all about just what you create for your customers. A friend of mine who just called this, we prefer to work with boring technologies, which sounds horrible at first stage, but then at the same time, these technologies are maybe boring, but you find developers also that can use those technologies, and that they will probably stay for the next 5-6 years. So you can still maintain that code, and you don't have to learn all the time something new.
Yeah, to be more precise, like how to get rid of that feeling that your code is the most important thing in the world. Like you have to write the best code, and that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm for a long time I was a developer too, and I love to write great code. And
yeah, okay, so you've been in the industry for quite some time.
Yeah.
So how did the industry and how did you evolve?
Yeah, so I started with being a software developer around 2000, my first job. Did some embedded software with C at that time, moved on to Java and loved Java and all the things. So, but I moved on, and also the technology moved on. And sometimes I want to learn something new and bring that into the team because I knew that this helps. But then also sometimes the task demanded that we have to just like use something new. So it's just like keep constantly up with what's out there, and just like read some blogs, listen to some podcasts. That's what I'm doing, just to know what's out there. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you always have to deeply understand the technology underneath for the first thing, but just like how does it impact our developer experience, and how does it help us to solve problems? And that's fine too. Just to learn something new, just like learn new programming language and see like if that makes you more effective. That doesn't mean that you have to use that programming language, because obviously like putting a new programming language in your code base just like requires a lot of the whole team to learn that, and that is not very smart to do. It should be just like a really hard decision to do these things.
You also mentioned this stereotype of a great developer as someone who, stays awake through the night, fixes all bugs, cannot go to sleep until everything is great. And you mentioned like that's not sustainable.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, it's always optimizing for efficiency, right? To just like, I want to just like do more features, fix more bugs, and if I just like want to push on that I would be just like burned out after a while.
Exactly. That's why I'm asking, because that's what often happens.
Yeah.
Like people are full of enthusiasm, they give their best and some more, and then they burn out after a few years.
Yeah, they probably invest their energy in the wrong side of things, and just like it's sometimes it's good to just like take a step back and see like what is really important for our software to move forward. Sometimes we get this view that we're just like so into it that we don't see like maybe this isn't smart to do. Maybe we should do something else instead. And that requires sometimes not to just work nights, but just take a step back and just see what are we building here, and where can we be more effective.
So what would your career advice for a junior developer, if they asked you today, be don't work too much, don't work yourself to burnout, stay on top of things, but don't chase every new shiny technology. What else?
I mean, I think every developer is different. Some developers want to just like, when they are junior, they look at senior developers and want to become the senior developer. And then they want to become the engineering manager. But there's so much other stuff out there, right? And not just like concentrating on the there's the developer career is great, and there's so much other stuff. But I can just like recommend to just like look out there and see what's your interest. Once you start coding and you get into the rhythm of just like, okay, I know now how coding is, just like look out there instead of diving deeper into what you're already doing, but also just like look out there and just like see where is my talent used in the best way for the organization, for myself.
Following up on that, you also mentioned this notion of becoming a product engineer.
Yes. Yes.
What is a product engineer? What does a product engineer do?
A good question. There's no actually role description of a product engineer, but this is something we came up with at Atlassian actually.
Okay.
Our CTO said just like some people tend to just like concentrate very, very much on the code side instead of concentrating, using their talents also to improve the product side of things. And as a product engineer, you of course know what's possible with the code. And then if your interest in the product comes along with it, you can create great things because you're building a great product and you know what's possible with code. So it's combining actually a product manager and an engineer that cares.
Yeah, those kind of engineers usually become product managers.
Yeah,
right?
But it don't have to be that way, right?
Hopefully, yeah.
It doesn't have to be. I mean, it's great if an engineer becomes a great product manager. Cool, great, but it doesn't have to be. And some people just like want to stay closer to the code, but also care about the product. And that's a great opportunity to just say, I'm just like a product engineer. I'm just like maybe also the link between our junior developers and the product people.
Is it similar with developer relations or advocacy or whatever you call it? Like you stay close to engineering and engineers, but you also expand on that?
I mean, yeah, in some way it is similar, in some way it's not, because I mean a developer relation person is just like it's a lot of different things what developer relation does these days. It's documentation to help actually developers to understand your product better. It's kind of marketing to raise awareness about your product, and it's just like helping also to onboard with webinars people, to onboard your users, the developers that use your product. So it's kind of a link too, right? It's not really engineering, it's not marketing, it's not really documentation or training. It's something in between. And you need to wear a lot of hats when you're a developer advocate.
Do you still write code?
I still do write code, yeah, and I enjoy it. But it's getting less and less because, I care more about the human side of software development and see like how can be teams more effective? How can we work better together in different environments like developers and operations? That's the real thing, right?
That's an interesting topic.
And developers and design and developers and product managers. I think if we optimize on that, or if we just like get better and working better together, we can create amazing things if that really works.
You've mentioned the company you work for now is a hiring or recruiting platform or something. So hiring developers is also a very interesting topic these days.
Yeah, there are a lot of open positions out there.
Exactly, like everyone wants developers. How to get them?
I mean, yeah, it's just like you need to be a good employer. Working maybe with interesting, I wouldn't say technology, but interesting products for developers. But the drivers of why people apply for a job are totally different. But yeah, there's a big market of open jobs at companies, small and large. And there's not that big amount of developers that want to change jobs or that are out there free on the market.
Actually, like they say, it's a war on talent, like an actual war.
Yeah, it kind of is.
It's not just there's a lot of open jobs, like there's war on talent.
Yeah, it is, and it will become more and more, especially because software is driving everything these days. We need more developers.
Does it make developers feel entitled?
Good question. Maybe I wouldn't go so far. But if you're a great developer, yeah, you can probably choose your.
And since we started this interview with the career advice, so if you were looking for a job now as a junior or mid developer, what would your criteria be?
My personal criteria.
Personal, or like just like
Yeah,
If
as I said,
someone, if
like,
someone asked you, hey, there are these 10 companies, they all want me to come work for them. How do I choose?
everyone is different. Some want to work for larger companies, some want to work for smaller companies. That has both advantages. Some people are looking for salaries, how high the salary is. So there's so many different drivers. I would just like look at, for me, the culture of the company is important to see, like how are they treating their people. Will I work on something interesting, which I can just like get up every day and be excited about, like, and not just go to work and say, oh yeah, I need to just like finish that job. Something that excites me, that drives me forward, where I can learn something, something new. So this would be my things that I would look for a job, and I think like could be also for junior developers interesting to just like look at these things.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.